So, good evening, everyone. I think we can start now and let's stick to the time. We prefer that. Uh, a lot of you know me and my colleague Shreyas, but who don't? I'm Pallavi Ade and my colleague Shreyas. We are the co-founders of Asian Pathfinders. We are really happy. Today we are kicking off our new series, The Dialogues, and we're kicking off with the Bihar elections. So, obviously, these are our speakers, but before we go into the speakers, I'll just possibly just give you a brief about us. So, we're going to have a discussion today on the role of Bihar politics in shaping the political narratives in India. And for that, we have three expert panelists. Our moderator, Deepu Sebastian Edmond, will introduce them. So, before that, about Asian Pathfinders, we started earlier this year with the whole idea of being a knowledge sharing platform for scholars, practitioners, academics to come together and have a constructive dialogue. A lot of you know the fireside chats we hold every Saturday, which is at 11 a.m. And now we are kicking off the dialogue series, where we are going to have panel discussions on contemporary topical issues. And no better topic than the Bihar elections, I think, to kick us off. And we are aimed to be informal, so please ask your questions, comments in the chat section. Please be on mute only because it reduces the noise. The video will be on YouTube. We know that a lot of you cannot join, so we put it on YouTube also. And so we have an explainer series also, which we do every week on different topics. This week we have it on Bihar elections. You can check it on our YouTube channel. So our next two speakers, this Saturday we have historian Rana Safi speaking on history in the digital age. So Shreyas will put the link a little later in the comment chat section so you can register for that. And then we have Sutapa Sanyal. So she was the DG in the UP police and we're really excited for that session too. So keep an eye out on our social media pages for that. So the guidelines, just respect the views of others, but please speak freely. Like I said, we are an informal forum. We encourage everyone to express themselves, but respect each other's views, respect intellectual property, and just be mindful of the language that we use. So this is how you can get in touch with us. And so before I pass it on to Deepu to introduce the speakers, I'll introduce Deepu Sebastian Edmond. He's a journalist who has over a decade of experience covering national as well as Bihar politics. He has been stationed in Jharkhand for Indian Express. He's worked with The Hindu. He's also worked with Vice Media, South China, Morning Post. And so he's written extensively on these issues. And I think he would be a good, and he also knows all our panelists because he's interacted with them during his professional work. So I think that would be a good place for us to start. That is giving it to Deepu and taking it from there.
Hi, thank you, Pallavi. We have three speakers today. We have Professor Sanjay Kumar, who is probably going to make a cinematic entry at the end of my introduction. He is a professor at the Center for Study of Developing Societies in Delhi. He was the director of CSDS till January 2020. Sanjay Kumar, sir, you would have seen him on TV a lot. He's always trying to make sense of politics, trying to understand. So I personally grew up reading him, trying to understand politics through his prism. And he writes a lot of columns. And the CSDS pre-poll and post-poll surveys are very important for journalists and researchers alike. We have Sarthak. Sarthak is an assistant professor at the University of Hyderabad now. I remember Sarthak from 2015 when he was doing, I think, his field work for his PhD in Bihar. So it was a comparative study of Bihar and Maharashtra politics. I think he was working at the Leiden University, I think the Institute of Area Studies at that time. So Sarthak is with us today. And Sarthak is going to talk about a comparison of national and regional players. And Archis Mohan is with us. And Archis is a very senior journalist, is a veteran journalist. Again, I grew up reading Archis, and he's one of the coolest journalists you will ever meet. So he's right now he's a freelance journalist. He was the political editor at Business Standard, which is like a big deal because Business Standard is taken very seriously among us journalists, and he was with Business Standard till July 2020. He was with the Telegraph, Hindustan Times before that, and now I see Archis. So I was only last week. I was again happy to see Archis write again, and I was actually consuming whatever he's written recently. So yeah, and Archis is going to talk about how Bihar is going to shape Indian politics for the time being after this. So I look forward to hearing from all of you. The rules are quite straightforward, if I may. Is that we're going to have all the speakers speak 15 minutes each and make their opening remarks. I think I'll give you some sort of a warning at around 14 minutes. After they speak, we'll have an interactive session. I'm hoping to a lot of questions. So please send in your questions as they speak. We've already had like in true tradition of what CSDS do. We've already had a pre-interactive session when before even introduce the speaker, we've had a question come in. So I'm hoping to see more questions. We will hope to answer everything that we have. And at the end of it, we will have a short 30-second or 1 minute time for all our speakers to make their closing remarks. And Pallavi will wrap it up for us today. So yeah, I think I'll open it up with Sanjay sir, and we'll hear what he has to say. So over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to speak on this very important platform. As I was talking to some of you, even before we formally started our discussion, I was trying to get a sense of what is this Asia Pathfinders, and I realized that this is a very important platform. So I'm happy to be on this platform, speak to the viewers, speak to all of you about Bihar elections. I know we are three speakers. After me, Sarthak is going to speak, and then Archis is going to speak. And we have broadly divided our topics into three kinds. And the mandate which I have is to speak largely on politics of Bihar in a historical perspective. And then Sarthak would be talking about, say, coalition, and Archis would be talking more about Bihar's impact of Bihar on the national politics, or Bihar politics on the national politics. So let me spend my 10-12 minutes speaking on how do I see the political trajectory of Bihar during last, say, 7 decades. We keep referring to 70 years all the time. So I also have to say, I want to look at 70 years of Bihar politics, how it has shaped. Broadly, I would like to divide Bihar politics into three different eras, 3 different periods. One, definitely, and this is not only true of Bihar, this is true of most of the North Indian states, which is the Congress era. If we look at all the elections between 1952 till 1989, this is the Congress era. This is the era of dominance of the Congress. And when I say dominance of the Congress, this is not only that Congress has been in power for most of the time during this time period, during these years, say 1952 till 1989. In between, there have been some change in government. Between 77 and 80, we had, the Janata Party government, and in 67 also we had non-Congress government. So there has been a brief period of, say, 3 to 4 years, 4 or 5 years, when there was a non-Congress government. But that's one big era of Congress era in Bihar politics between 1952 till 1989. We have an election in 1990, assembly election, which is the turning point of Bihar elections. And in 1990, the assembly elections witnessed Congress getting defeated badly. And this is the era when, at the time, it was Janata Dal. So Janata Dal coming to power with Lalu Yadav as the chief minister, Lalu Prasad Yadav as the chief minister. So later on, there has been divisions in Janata Dal. From Janata Dal, at one point of time, it became RJD, Samta Party, and Janata Dal. Then later on, Samta Party disappeared in 1995. So finally, we ended up having 2 big blocks within this family called Janata Dal. And now we have Janata Dal United and RJD. So, but starting from 1990 till 2005 is the Lalu era. And during the last 1 month or 1.5 months, this is talked about at length by leaders of BJP and leaders of NDA, leaders of JDU, and this is referred as while the politicians in the opposition camp, and when I say opposition means the ruling party at the moment, BJP and JDU, and even Chirag Paswan's party, which is Lok Janshakti Party. So this period is constantly being referred during the campaign as the Jungle Raj. And why do they say that? So this is the 15 years. So let me first complete the cycle till 2020. So between 1952 till 1989 is the Congress era. Between 2000 and 1990 till 2005 is the Lalu era. And from 2005 till 2020 is the Nitish era. As I said, the three periods have distinct identities, or I would like to highlight what has been the important features of the three broad periods in electoral history of Bihar. So first, let me state about the Congress rule. Normally, this is not only the period of dominance of the Congress, because Congress won large number of elections. They won almost all the elections except the two elections, which is 1967 election and 1977 election. Except these two elections, they went on winning all the assembly elections. They had a government which lasted for about 30 years. But what has happened in this period, what was unique thing about that? As I said, dominance of the Congress, not only in terms of winning the number of elections, but also winning by sizable majority. If you look at this period, most of the assembly elections were won by Congress by very large margin. 10%, 12%, 15%, 24%, 25%. Absolute dominance of the Congress during this period. But there is a caveat. There was a political dominance of the Congress, but since the opposition was weak, a unique thing was happening within the Congress itself. The opposition was weak, so one could find congressmen fighting among themselves, in a sense, what we call some kind of a rivalry going on within the Congress. And if you look at the instability of the government, and I'm not saying instability in sense the government was getting overthrown by some other political party, but instability in terms of how frequent the chief ministers changed during this period. Just to cite the data, 30 years of Congress rule witnessed 13 chief ministers. So while the political dominance there was a Congress dominance, but the position of chief ministers kept changing. 13 chief ministers within a period of 30 years, and you can divide 30 by 13 and you will get what was the average tenure of the chief minister, in spite of party having such a huge majority. Between 80 and 85, between 85 and 89, and this is the time when Congress had three chief ministers. Between 80 and 85, there were two chief ministers. Hardly a Congress government lasted full term with a chief minister completing 5 years term. For most of the government, there has been a change of chief minister, and this was unique, very unique, that between 85 and 89, there were three chief ministers were changed. So this is what is the unique feature about the Congress dominance. Now I move on to the Lalu era. And Lalu era, there are two different diametrically opposed views about 15 years of Lalu Raj. As I mentioned earlier, this is constantly being, the BJP and JDU is constantly campaigning about Lalu Raj as the Jungle Raj. But in my own sense, yes, on the economic indicators, on the developmental indicators, this was not the best of the time Bihar has seen. This very little development, or you could say that hardly any development, economic development, infrastructural development took place during this 15 years. But I think this was the period time of social empowerment. And this is the time when Mandal Commission was implemented. And this is the beginning of a big change. This is the period when Bihar virtually saw a political revolution in the state. And when I say political revolution, I refer to how people started voting, how people started mobilizing in support or against political party, and look at how the nature of assembly changed. And when I say refer to nature of assembly, I mean representation of people belonging to representation of MLAs belonging to different caste community in the assembly. Up till 89, there was an absolute dominance of the upper caste, which constitutes only 15% of Bihar's population. But in the assembly, there were more than almost 50%. MLAs belong to upper caste. Brahmins' domination was absolutely very high. Almost 35%, 30% of MLAs were from one particular caste, Brahmins. Absolute dominance of Brahmins. But this is the time when political mobilization of the lower castes started happening, and not only political mobilization was a result of social mobilization, which was referred to by Tejasvi Yadav in one of the rallies which he had to cover up. In a sense, he said, लालू जी के राज में था बाबू साहब और दलित आमने सामने चेहरे से चेहरा से मिला करके बैठते थे. I think what he was referring to was the social empowerment. So that was the time of social empowerment. Those 15 years, I would put a label as a time of social empowerment, the era of social empowerment. Yes, a big question mark on the economic and infrastructural development of the state. Now in 2005, this is the first time Nitish Kumar becomes the chief minister of Bihar. NDA wins the election, and from 2005 till 2020, which is referred as a period of great, not social empowerment, but period of great economic development. Various kinds of development has taken place, to the extent that the chief minister started being referred as the Sushashan Babu, which means a person who has brought, who has streamlined the administration in the state. But that is even being questioned. Remember, both the periods are being questioned. The JDU and the BJP is questioning the social empowerment which was brought about by Lalu Yadav and his team, Lalu Yadav and Rabdi Devi, and the period which was till few months back was referred as the period of great economic development, great infrastructural development, great change in Bihar, is also being questioned now, not only by the voters of the Bihar, but also to a great extent by the opposition, the current opposition. The Chirag Paswan, largely is opposing the Nitish Kumar, but Tejasvi Yadav and his team is questioning the the developmental work done by Nitish Kumar. So this is also being questioned, that yes, Nitish Kumar may have done some work, developmental work, infrastructural developmental work between 2005 and 2010, but the pace of economic development or the pace of infrastructural development or whatever changes, positive changes he brought about, started declining. There was a decline between 2010 and 15, and after 2015 and between 2020, last 5 years, there has hardly been any economic development in the state, and they keep referring to large number of unemployed youth in Bihar. So this is Nitish period, Nitish era. The Lalu era is also being contested. We never thought, maybe 6 months back, it was hard to believe that even Nitish era would be contested so aggressively, and people will actually buy this argument. I think sizable number of people are ready to accept this argument that Nitish era, Nitish period cannot be seen as only a period of economic development, a great progress. There are big question marks which needs to be put when we say Sushashan Babu has done a lot of work, or there has been a lot of development during Nitish Kumar's era. So these are broadly the three era in Bihar politics. If we look at last 70 years, the one point of difference between the Congress and the last 30 years, in which we had 15 years of Lalu era and 15 years of Nitish government, the chief ministers have remained, the position of chief ministers have remained very stable. No change, no challenge to the chair of chief minister. But we might think that Lalu has been very dominant, Nitish Kumar has been very dominant, but if you look at their victory margins, they may have been the chief minister, Lalu and his team has been the chief minister for 15 years, but the victories have not been very big, except for the 1990 victory, which he won by about 12% vote. his victory in 1995 victory was a big victory where RJD and the allies won by, won by say 11-12% vote. But 1990 victory and 2000 victory was very small, very thin victory. Similarly, Nitish Kumar's victory was also one convincing victory in 2010. 2005 victory was not a convincing victory. 2015, it's very difficult to compare because, as we all know, Nitish Kumar and Lalu joined hands and then they defeated BJP with a handsome margin. So this is the difference, that this is the time, last 30 years, political instability means no single party is in a position to win a majority, and that is what resulted into Bihar entering into a phase of coalition politics, about which I think Sarthak would talk more about that. So this is the period when chief ministerial position has been very stable, but the government has not been winning elections as convincingly as the perception gets created that Lalu era was an absolute dominance of RJD, or the Nitish Kumar era has been absolute dominance of the NDA if we look at the number of the votes poll or the support base of these political parties. So I think since no political parties has been able to get a majority, win a majority because of the sectional support base these political parties enjoy in the state, that is what has resulted into the era of coalition politics in Bihar during last 30 years. So if I want to club Nitish period and the Lalu's period and try to draw a similarity, what is the similarity between these two eras? The similarity is, this is the era of coalition politics in India, coalition politics in Bihar, and I think this is the time I should stop and maybe pass on to Sarthak Bagchi to speak more about coalition politics in Bihar.
Thank you, Sanjay sir. That was quite informative, and I'm sure a lot of questions are being written right now for you. And I look forward to all the questions after this. I welcome Sarthak to speak now. Over to you, Sarthak.
Right. Okay. Am I audible? Okay. Thank you. And I think it's always difficult to, speak after somebody like Sanjay sir has spoken, because he's like an encyclopedia on, politics in Bihar, and definitely for a very important, analysis, one should always look at his book on postmandal politics in Bihar, which is again a very, huge repository of, how politics has shaped and shifted, in the period that he was talking about in that last 30 years. So I have been asked to speak on the regional parties versus the national parties in Bihar, and which will involve a little bit about why coalition governments or why alliances are particularly very important for anybody to win election in Bihar. But I just thought that while I was trying to find out about this idea that why are these regional parties, or why so many regional parties arise in Bihar, I thought maybe it will be useful to get a little bit of look back into the history of party fragmentation in Bihar. And I thought maybe in a lot of the analysis and a lot of the discussions on Bihar politics that we are having right these days, maybe we are not looking at the history and when did these fragmentations start taking place. So I will, my presentation will touch upon those parts. I think a lot of it has already been covered by Sanjay ji in his presentation, but I'll just try to try to sketch over it so that we understand as to why there are the prominence of so many regional parties have happened and in Bihar, and why national parties still need the alliance, need to ally with these regional parties and cannot make it on their own, right? So I think recently, I think Sanjay ji has written also in Indian Express and in Live Mint that the difference between the regional parties in Bihar and UP is that in UP the regional parties can come to power on the basis of their own social support or vote support, right? Like we have had the last three governments, like even the national party like BJP could come to power on its own in UP. Before that, Akhilesh Yadav could come to power on his own, Samajwadi Party, and again in Mayawati could come to power on her own, right, majority. But we haven't had that kind of a thing in Bihar, and that is something which is also talking about the fragmentation among the different social groups, which are which are basically supporting all these political parties. And needless to say, we have a very kind of a full house in that order, even in this election, because we have in terms of regional parties, we have the JDU, Janata Dal United led by Nitish Kumar, we have RJD led by Tejasvi Yadav, and young and energetic Tejasvi Yadav, right? And both these parties are having a support of social basis of, let's say, RJD has Muslims and Yadavs very strongly in their favor. The JDU has the EBC vote and the Kurmi and the Koheri vote very strongly again in their favor. Plus some chunks of Muslims, which earlier we have seen from the Pasmanda Muslim that Nitish Kumar has gained. Plus Nitish Kumar also has the, it is said it is the casteless, but I do not really agree with that kind of an idea, but it is the very important vote of the women voters. And in fact, it is not to be discarded that if at all this time Nitish Kumar safely sails home, it will be because of the women voters who are still voting out in large numbers for Nitish Kumar, right? Plus, we also have a lot of regional, like small regional players also, like say the Lok Janshakti Party, which is again party representative of the upper caste, and also the Paswan among the Dalits, right? Then we have the Jitan Ram Majhi's Hindustan Awam Morcha, which is again representative of the Dalit, but not a pan-Dalit party again. It has its own sections of the Dalits which support Jitan Ram Majhi's party, right? Similarly, we have Upendra Kushwaha, who was a part of Nitish Kumar earlier in Samta Party, who was very close to Karpuri Thakur during his time. And Upendra Kushwaha went out of JDU and formed his own RLSP, right? Then we again have this new political player who has entered the elections arena in Bihar called Mukesh Sahani, who calls himself son of Malla. And he has his own party called VIP, which is a formal ally of BJP or the NDA, right? And they have again a caste support of around 22 jatis of the EBC, which is combined together to form the Nishad community or Nishad cluster, right? And these are basically riverine caste people who are who have occupation related to fishermen and net boatmen, etc. Right? So these are different parties which are again emerging out of that milieu of social milieu of castes, which have been mobilized and which have been empowered through this entire period of ideas of social justice and idea of that kind of empowerment for the backward caste, which has not only we see that it has been a product of the Mandal Commission, but I would argue that the history of this goes back to the 1960s actually, when the rise of the backward caste communities or the backward caste politicians coincided with the rise of anti-Congress politics, right? And especially in Bihar, more than any other state, right? We also have Pappu Yadav's Jan Adhikar Party. I should not miss that, because again, when we are talking about particular caste leaders, and many of these caste leaders are also having kind of sub-regional basis or sub-regional popularity. So like Pappu Yadav will not be a pan-Bihar leader, right? I mean, he will be restricted to somebody like a leader of the Yadav, but not a leader of the Yadav across Bihar, from what was called like, from Bachwara to Bigwara. He will not be seen like that, but he will be seen as somebody who is in the Kosi region, more popular with the Yadavs. So you have caste leaders, but you also have caste leaders of a sub-regional popularity. So there is more and more layered fragmentation which is happening within the within these kind of small regional players also. But if again, like just to say that coming back to the historical kind of tracing the journey, of course the Congress system or the Congress party has been hegemonical, and the first phase in 1952 to 67, Congress was very much a very important player. And again, we saw that there was a revival of the Congress in the 1979 to 1990 period. So that again was a very important period. And like Sanjay ji mentioned, that it was not only an important period in terms of Congress's re-emergence, in terms of the upper caste vote share and the upper caste politician, but it was also a period which was very much undermined by the center, right? Because that was a period in which many chief ministers were changed, and many chief ministers were completely, removed day in and day out. So that was a period of, I mean, while there was a social stability in terms of vote banking, but there was a kind of a political instability in terms of the governments that were continuously dismissed. But in the 1960s, as a powerful opposition to the Congress, Ram Manohar Lohia's emergence is very important, and so he decided to turn the backward caste agricultural groups as his political base, and the rising backward caste were also looking for a political party that could represent their political ambitions. And it was Lohia's slogan of Pichra Pave Sau Mein Saath, which was talking about the backward caste getting 60% of their share. So this was basically another slogan, which was Jiski Jitni Hissedari Uski Utni Bhagidari. So these were the slogans which was basically that talking about a revolution or a more empowerment for the backward classes by getting access to political resources and by getting access to their political power. So that was something which was seen as a very important tool in terms of getting empowered politically, and thereby attempting to there was this idea of attempting to consolidate the anti-Congress forces through this kind of a backward caste empowerment. And the 1967 elections were also held along with these non-Congress sentiments, and there was a non-Congress government was formed, right? And we see that there were many, backward caste MLAs which were getting elected, and we had the first backward classes chief minister coming into BP Mandal, who came to power in Bihar, and then there was the Bhola Paswan Shastri, who was the first scheduled caste chief minister also in that period of 1967 to 69. So we saw that these were important steps which were coming up, and there was this important idea of the Sanyukt Socialist Party, which was also emerging. So that these things were have an important role to play for what actually laid out to be the Lalu period. And I think following that, the next phase, which is seen as the Congress kind of a resurgence, I think Sanjay ji has already talked about that, so I'll skip that part. But I'll say that there was a very important point in that turmoil, because the 70s and the 80s period in Bihar also see a lot of caste violence, which led to a very aggressive mobilization of caste groups against each other, like pitting upper caste versus the lower caste. So that kind of thing, which ultimately led to the kind of politics, antagonistic politics that was played by Lalu Yadav, and it was also electorally, it played the electoral dividend for that kind of politics. That's also important, because the turmoil in Bihar was seen as a product of two related but independent struggles, right? The political struggle for control of the state, pitting the forward caste against the backward caste, and there was also a socio-economic struggle of the landless lower caste against the land owning forward and backward caste. So there was, again, we see that there is again a kind of a, even within the backward caste, there is a land owning backward caste, which is seen as a more empowered caste, which is where we see that over later on in the Lalu period, this led to the idea of the Yadavization of Bihar politics, right? And that is something which also gave the idea that all the backward castes or all the other backward castes are not getting equally empowered, right? And which is what Nitish Kumar and other even national parties like BJP actually started to take advantage of, because this perceived idea of the Yadavization is what actually led to the idea that there is a marginal section within the backward caste which is not getting as adequate representation in the political power as Yadavs and other social castes are getting as during that part of the Lalu Yadav regime, right? And after that, I think it becomes very important to understand that what Lalu Yadav was doing, right? I mean, so he's basically, in a sense, he talked about, or he brought in this idea of, democracy with dignity. So in a sense, there was also the idea of izzat, right, and samman, which was introduced into this idea, and this antagonism was basically also played out between the upper caste and the forward and the back versus the backward narrative, to show that like Sanjay ji just mentioned, that the Bura Bal Hatao, right, and that was basically to seen as a kind of a mockery of Indira Gandhi's statement of Garibi Hatao, and that was the Congress statement of Garibi Hatao, that they the upper caste are saying Garibi Hatao, but that basically translates to the Garib, which are the backward caste. So we would rather say that you remove the Burabal, which is the Bhumihar, Rajput, Baniya and Lala. So these are the upper caste people whom you have to remove, and then we only can claim. It's also seen that political power is basically seen as the means to empowerment, because education and other things, economic opportunities were not so prevalent in that period in Bihar. So in that sense, political power or state capture was actually the only means to getting kind of empowerment in that period, which was seen possible, right, through mobilization of these caste groups, and which is what Lalu Yadav did to a certain extent. And in fact, 1990 is very important in terms of electoral representation also, because 1990s actually created the first time that OBC representation in the Bihar Assembly was higher than the upper caste representation, and that trend started picking up only after 1990 election. So that 1990 election comes as a break point in that breakdown of that hegemony of the upper caste. And again, we see that with this it becomes also important that the upper caste domination in Bihar politics could never come back, which in a way explains that why a party like BJP, national party like BJP, which generally caters to the upper caste vote bank, and also represents upper caste interest, political interest to a large extent, right? Even in Bihar, their candidatures given to upper caste are much higher as compared to other social categories. But they cannot do that on their own. They cannot come to power on their own. They still need, whether in an overt manner, the JDU, or whether in a covert manner, the LJP. But regional allies are very important, because it is the what this party fragmentation or the fragmentation of party system in Bihar has done, along with a simultaneously happening social churning, right, which exists from the pre-Mandal era, but more volatility and more vigorously in the post-Mandal era. What this has done is create a kind of a very dynamic social milieu in which a lot of political parties are actually able to get candidates and votes to draw from these chunk of jatis, and to which basically help them in aspiring to claim power. We see that happening because an interesting thing is that when we talk about the regional players, a very important idea about how Janta Dal claims to be the sole for all most political parties. So how many political parties are there in the fray today? There is the RJD, there is JDU, there is LGP, and there Rashtriya Lok Janshakti Party, right? Sorry, there is the RLSP, which is the Lok Samta Party, right? And all these parties are actually offshoots of the Janta Dal. So we have to understand that this churning has created a very wide pool from where all these regional parties are picking caste alliances and caste equations, and from this same pool candidates are also emerging. From the same pool voting groups are also emerging, which is what drives this kind of what can be called as a laghu udyog of regional parties in the
Sarthak?
yeah.
Hi.
I'll just stop in just 1 minute. So this is something which is very important to understand, that why why so many regional parties are proliferating in Bihar. And I think to explain this, somewhere the the idea of the social empowerment and anti-Congress politics, but also Mandal politics, and also a little bit of the pre-Mandal politics also goes in a long way to explain why such political alliances become so important and regional parties become so important. So there is the idea behind this is what my main argument is that there is a lot of say that a lot of this is about political opportunism, but it is not about so much about political opportunism as it is about political pragmatism, which is about catering to these the interests of this very wide pool of social milieu, which has become politically empowered and which is also become very assertive over and aspirational over this period, which is also known as where we have also seen that the deepening of democracy has happened in India overall. I think I'll stop there, and I think probably we'll take up more questions when it comes.
Thank you, Sarthak. So we've had the history of Bihar, we've had the present of Bihar. So this is very, very informative. It was, like you said, you started where Sanjay sir stopped, gave us a nice lowdown on what's happening right now. And after you, we will give a certain crystal ball to Archis, because he is supposed to talk about the future of all this, where the history and the present of Bihar, where all this is leading towards, and after elections, what are we going to see? Archis, welcome, and over to you now.
You're on mute, Archis. Is it okay now?
Yes, yes.
Can you? Yeah. So I'm a journalist, and I do not bring the kind of academic rigor that my previous two speakers who are professors do. I'll try somewhat. So first, let me lay out the map. In case anybody wants a clearer view of that, please do read Sanjay sir's piece today in Express. But generally, just to map the lay of the land right now, primarily there are three poles to Bihar politics currently. There's BJP, there's JDU, and there's RJD. Of the three, if there is two on one side, they generally win. We saw in 2015 when RJD and JDU were together, they won. And 2010 when JDU and BJP were together, they won. So right now, BJP and JDU are together. On paper, they should be ahead, and here's why. BJP is primarily upper caste, which is 20% in Bihar. JDU is primarily part of the intermediate castes, OBCs, primarily Kurmis and other castes. And Nitish Kumar, during his tenure, has also knitted a patchwork of Mahadalit support base. They've also reached out to the parties, as Mr. Bagchi was also saying, VIP, which is the Nishad Party, and Malla Party, and Hindustani Awam Morcha, which is a Mahadalit party led by Jitan Ram Majhi. So together, they, at least on paper, combine a sizable presence. Probably on the scoreboard, on the trade ground, there'll be 40 plus before even going out to bat. In opposition is RJD, which is primarily Muslim Yadav Party support base, along with it Congress. They are somewhat like 30%. So, on paper, it would seem that India is ahead. However, let's come to what's different currently. One, and now I'm getting into a bit of speculation, bit of my understanding. You'll hopefully indulge me on that. One, I think, taking from where Professor Kumar also left, the BJP approached it with the perception that, since it's expanding, trying to expand, particularly in areas where it's not been dominant traditionally. For example, Orissa, Bengal, and Bihar, at least in the east. My suspicion is it tried to upstage Mr. Kumar, and it, in a sense, provoked the LJP or inspired the LJP to fight against Mr. Kumar on the seats that Mr. Kumar was contesting from its share of between the two, his share with the BJP. There are 243 seats, they're contesting 120 each and giving some seats to their smaller allies. However, things somehow didn't work out the way the BJP wanted to. It soon realized that if Mr. Kumar were to sink, BJP might sink with him. It had to step back in its very covert support, but very, very obvious support to LJP and Mr. Chirag Paswan. You would remember till day before yesterday, there have not been an advertisement where Mr. Kumar and Mr. Modi or any of the BJP leaders were shown together. It was only yesterday that the BJP and the others finally came up with an advertisement where Mr. Kumar and Mr. Modi were together. Secondly, they had to tell the world that they have nothing to do with Mr. Chirag Paswan in Bihar. Mr. Chirag Paswan continues to remain an alliance partner at the center. And there's a very interesting interview of BJP President Mr. JP Nadda in today's Hindustan Times. He keeps insisting that, oh, Mr. Chirag Paswan is an alliance partner in center. Center is different from state. We all know what that means. So I think that it didn't work out the way they wanted to, and they had to announce very hurriedly that Mr. Modi and Mr. Kumar will start sharing the stage. And why I think it didn't work out, and why this BJP's expansionism weakened, is in the narrative. Now, I'm not a pollster, and for a journalist, it's always hazardous to start predicting who is winning and who's losing. That's best left to pollsters. But we can look at the narrative. Till about last week, till 2 days before Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman landed in Patna and announced 90 lakh jobs as part of the BJP's manifesto, Mr. Kumar, Mr. JP Nadda, and Mr. Sushil Modi, who is the finance minister, were ridiculing Tejasvi Yadav about his 10 lakh job promise. I find it very intriguing that they didn't have any inkling that the FM would land up a day later and announce 19 lakh jobs. I'm talking about the larger narrative. One can always kind of nitpick, though these 19 lakhs are entrepreneurial jobs, while Mr. Tejasvi Yadav is promising 10 lakh jobs. Where will he get those jobs, etc., etc. But, in public perception, there was Tejasvi Yadav promising 10 lakh jobs and triggering such lot of crowd support during his rallies. One can always argue that, the crowds can be arranged and put in the caveat that not all crowds translate into votes, as we saw both in 2017 UP elections as well as 2019 UP Lok Sabha elections. But obviously the BJP was feeling the heat of this 10 lakh job promise. So the narrative has changed. The narrative is no longer the BJP's narrative on Article 370, on CAA, on Ram Mandir. They're continuing to mention it, but they're also trying to balance it with telling people in Bihar about development work, about their promises on jobs, etc. So the narrative is shifted. And from there, I'll come to another assumption that has been made, which is that Prime Minister Narendra Modi's popularity should keep the BJP happy in Bihar as well. I'm not disputing that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is not popular, but if you look at assembly elections from February 2017 onwards, from Tripura, BJP has won simple majority in only 2 elections, Tripura and Arunachal Pradesh. Admittedly, of these 17, a whole lot of the states like Andhra, Telangana, etc., BJP does not carry the kind of influence it does in its traditional areas. But even then, in the state elections, the BJP's appeal, both Prime Minister Modi's and the appeal of national issues has shown diminishing returns, as we saw in Haryana, as we saw in Jharkhand, as we saw in Maharashtra very recently. So since we have covered a bit of what is the lay of the land and what is the BJP's approach to it, third is if the caste coalitions are such, where is there any surprise? So the surprise, as again Professor Kumar has also written, is in the demographic composition of Bihar right now. 52% of Bihar currently is below, was born after 1984. And of that, around 1/4 uh, does not have has faint memories of the Jungle Raj, alleged Jungle Raj of Lalu Yadav. Yes. Add to that Tejasvi Yadav's young age. Now, Tejasvi Yadav will turn 31 on 9th November. Chirag and Tejasvi Yadav has been talking about how Nitish Kumar is very tired, exhausted, etc. Chirag Paswan, incidentally, will turn 38 on 31st October, a few days from now. And Chirag Paswan has also been talking about how they need to create Yuva Bihar, etc. And again, how Nitish Kumar is tired. Now you add that two up, 31 plus 38, you reach 69. That's Nitish Kumar's age. So general analysis is that Tejasvi Yadav will somehow break these caste barriers, overcome these caste barriers, and appeal to youth across most castes, if not all. I don't know, again, I'm not a pollster. Pollsters have a better pulse on these things. I can at best talk to 5-10 people in a day. So I'm not going to hazard a guess. But that's generally the theory, that the youth will overwhelmingly vote for Tejasvi Yadav and his alliance, and somehow the strength that the NDA shows on paper will be defeated by Tejasvi Yadav's appeal to the youth. Now, what it does in future, how it pans out if the BJP were not to win it, or were to win it with a thin majority. I think it's already bit of bad news for the BJP that it has had to shift narrative from national security issues to issues of governance, of jobs, of development issues, trying to answer what happened during the lockdown, etc. Because from now, it's already nearly lost Haryana. It somehow formed a government in Haryana. It lost Maharashtra through backdoor, admittedly, but even in Maharashtra, it had been aspiring to reach near the majority mark on its own. Jharkhand it lost quite comprehensively. And after Bihar, there's Bengal, Assam, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Pondicherry next year. And then to 2022, the big one, UP, along with Punjab, Uttarakhand, etc. If it were to lose or not do well in Bihar right now, and this entire narrative of jobs, etc., becomes center stage, then it becomes a bit problematic in terms of discourse. BJP's discourse has largely been, for the past few months, couple of years, largely been national security. So it'll become difficult in Bengal. Assam probably, might still be okay. Tamil Nadu, BJP is not much of a player. Kerala, again, BJP is not much of a player. So from here to Uttar Pradesh, and as we see, developments have already started taking place in Uttar Pradesh. BSP Chief Mayawati is supporting BJP in Rajya Sabha polls, and we have this revival of the Krishna Janmabhoomi court case issue. So BJP is trying to cobble up something, and Akhilesh Yadav is reaching out to BSP. So things are becoming interesting. So a lot depends on Bihar, on how the future narrative in subsequent months, until at least Bengal, Assam, etc. elections shapes up, and from there how it shapes up again till UP elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Archis. Thank you for telling us what's going to happen after this. So before we open up for questions, I'll make some observations, if I may. Is that, so I am in this lovely position of being able to ask all the questions and not having to answer anything after that. And that's good, right? Because I'm a journalist, right? But as a journalist, we all have this thing for a story, right? We all love to be told a good story, a good narrative. And I think an election at the end of the day is that the person with the most convincing narrative, the most convincing story can sometimes carry the day, right? And sometimes that, as a journalist, and probably I've been guilty of this, is that we contribute to that story, we help build that story, we tell that story to people, and often that becomes about version of the great man theory, right? That these big people, they influence history in front of us. They can save you, they can doom you. Some of them are evil outright, and that's something that we do as media, as politicians, and we're all part of this storytelling process, especially during elections. And the problem with the great man of our times is that the great man of our times, all these great men, they don't want to tell us what's going on, right? So they tell you something else, and they don't really give us the game when what's happening. So when I think of this, I often think of what happened in 2015 in Bihar, and when I was in Bihar after the elections, the day of the counting, and I remember the morning results were coming in, trickling in, and Sarthak is smiling because he knows what exactly is happening at this point, because we were all in Bihar this time, and the morning of the results, and I remember my former editor is in the television studios, and the early results by around 10:30, he's already blaming Nitish Kumar for his arrogance and saying Nitish has lost Bihar, and everybody was saying Nitish is lost, because that is conforming with the narrative of the time, that Nitish Kumar will lose and the BJP is coming back, right? This is a story that we've all been told, and this is a story I told myself, because when I traveled across Bihar, that's the kind of story I thought I saw, right? Despite evidences to the contrary. And I was standing in front of Nitish Kumar's official residence, and I kind of had an out-of-body experience. I saw myself collapse on the footpath and have my head on my hands, because the results were changing drastically right in front of us. And then everybody had to change the story, right? Everybody had to change the narrative, and then post facto explain what had happened in Bihar. And my explanation has always been, the story I tell myself is something that happened in 2014 during the Lok Sabha elections, when I remember a man, I had been having this discussion with a Nitish Kumar voter. He had been voting for Nitish Kumar for a while. And I asked him, why aren't you voting for Nitish Kumar this time? Why won't you? He said, this vote is for Modi. I said, okay, so what is the guarantee that next year you're going to vote for Modi? I said, no, I'm not voting for Modi next year. 2015 is for Nitish Kumar. I want him to be chief minister. I don't want him to be prime minister. And for me, that is the story I tell myself, that guy and a lot of others like him kept their word, right? Had a certain kind of contract with Nitish Kumar at that time. And so for me, I mean, to borrow or steal from somebody who is much more articulate than me, I'd say Bihar, and this is what I've been thinking of when I think about this, is that Bihar is people, right? And it's sometimes lost in this narrative that it is people, and their hopes and their fears and stuff. And something as simple as this employment versus jobs fight. This question of, do you want employment or do you want a job? What is happening right now? This question of 10 lakh jobs or 19 lakh employment opportunities. And I think about it, and I think about what a Yadav voter is going to see. He's going to see that his party is going to give, like Archis was saying, right? Is it a call to all the unemployed youth of Bihar, or is it a call to all Yadav voters saying, we will give you that job? From an EBC voter point of view, is he threatened by that? That is it a capture of Bihar bureaucracy, state bureaucracy by the Yadavs? If 10 lakh or a portion of 10 lakh goes out, right? The whole CPI ML narrative that's being given out right now. What is the Bihar voter? I don't think there's an average Bihar voter to begin with, but what are Dalits of Bihar thinking when they see this whole narrative that is being peddled? At the same time, is it a dog whistle to the upper caste to say unite, right? There is a CPI ML coming after you all over again. And when I think about it, I think about this assumption that we've somehow started to live with, that the upper castes of Bihar are one block now. And that's somehow supposed to be okay, because everybody else has been split. The OBCs have been split. The Dalits have been split. The Muslims have been split. But somehow it's okay that we accept as some sort of natural law that the upper caste of Bihar will be a single block. They have some sort of cognitive unity, and they will all go to the polls together and vote as one, and everybody else is fighting for scraps, right? And that somehow for me is a little bit of a shock when I think about it like that. And this is I think this is what it comes down to, right? Are you, as a politician, are you feeding the hopes or the fears of these people, the migrants who've come back from all these states? And what is the story that you're saying? And again, before this talk began, we talked about how important the campaign is to Bihar from the 2015 elections, right? The story that was sold to the people or told to the people at that time mattered, right? These things are important. I'm trying to understand how this story, what is going to win here? Is it a story of hope, or is it a story of fear that's going to win the day at the end of all this? The problem ultimately for me is that often all these stories right now are told on WhatsApp, right? So we are not privy to these stories. And the voter who gets these stories is not telling us because it's sometimes appeal to their primal base and they don't want to share that with you. And often we are like what happened to me in 2015. We are left to explain the results post facto, right? Like we are supposed to fit in all this into some sort of logic on counting day. So yeah, so these are some of the things that I was going through when I was listening to the speakers. Thank you all. Thank you, Archis, for this speech. I'll open it up for questions. I think the first question. I think I'll take Shreyas's question, and he was asking this to Sanjay sir. So Shreyas asked about the importance or the historical importance of whether ideology, social issues, or economic development, which of these have been the dominant factor in Bihar elections, ideology, social issues, or economic development. And I would add to that, if you can tell us if something of this nature, of this migrant crisis that's been going on, and often what we've learned from contemporary electoral history is that when there are economic crises, they usually appear among the electorate in different forms, as sort of frustration, anger, racism, things like that. So how is it manifesting in this election? Or is there any sort of anger at all at what's going on, the migrant crisis and the subsequent economic depression that's among the people of the country and in Bihar, right? So Sanjay sir, if you can take that question for us.
Uh, First, about the ideology, how much does ideology play a role in Bihar election this time? I think I have no hesitation to say ideology, leave aside this election, even the past election, and not only in Bihar. If we look at how politics is taking shape in different states of the country, the role of ideology has got very, very minimized. So ideology is, the role of ideology is very minimalist in these elections in Bihar, but these elections are not unique in that respect. As I said, this is happening across the country in many states. But the other factors which you raised, whether economic development, economic prosperity, economic well-being, or development, um, whether those plays a role, or and then you connected it with the migrant crisis, the livelihood issue. I think these are all connected, and it would be very difficult to say this is playing and this is not playing an important role. This is all the issues of livelihood, whether you say economic development, whether you say job opportunities, whether you mention economic crisis, migrant crisis. Uh, so this is an important issue, because, and even if we say develop infrastructural issues, so infrastructural issues did play an important role in say 2010 election, but now, and that is also connected to the livelihood issue. People would say, people would say, and this is right as well, if the law and order situation is not right, if the roads are not there, if the electricity is not there, people won't be able to set up industries. And if the industries are not set up, then generating employment becomes very, very difficult, because government doesn't simply have the capacity to generate employment. So elections largely are contested these days around these issues, and this is coming out very, very prominent. This is what is visible in Bihar elections very prominently in these elections, that issues of livelihood, and which encompasses everything, the migrant crisis. But my own sense is that the migrant issue, the issues of you know, the problems which the migrant face is not that prominent. It is all about employment opportunity, livelihood issues, and in this big umbrella which is called livelihood, employment, etc. Under that, there is a couple of strings of migrant crisis as well, but we don't see migrant crisis as a separate, independent issue which is looming large in these elections.
Thank you, sir. Um, to Sarthak, if I may. Anushka had asked a question on this mobilization of multiple parties under the RJD umbrella this time, and if that would transcend conventional vote banks, you know. I would add a little to that and ask you if you can tell us if you see. I mean, it's probably too early to talk about this, but if you see what difference, or if any, between the RJD of Lalu Prasad and the RJD of his son, right? Is there, and I am honestly confused because we talked about this, Archis talked about it, and we've been hearing this a lot, that the RJD of Tejaswi is somehow appealing to a youth audience. I mean, he's remarkably closer to Rahul Gandhi in the language he uses, unemployment, things like that. Rahul Gandhi's recent speech in Bihar again. So, what differences do you see? Is this a big tent RJD that's being formed, and what do you see going forward will happen?
See, I mean, I'll answer the first part of the question, begin with the first part of the question. I think what Anushka is asking about more decentralized and dissected representation, right? Because when we are saying about different caste leaders and different caste groups emerging, and actually that has happened over a period in time, and I think that is also due to Lalu's idea of social empowerment and social justice, which was also symbolic in nature largely, but again which was backed up by Nitish Kumar in terms of policy changes, right? The EBC reservations at the panchayat levels, and I have a paper on that which talks about informal democratization, and which this has actually led to a very big rise of political players or political actors at the village level, at the panchayat level, and hitherto backward or marginalized sections have now found their own neta. Like in terms of there is a very common term called as dukhiya ban gaya mukhiya. So I mean, from Pichdi Jati, like from Ravidasis, or from Pasis, Tatma, from even from Musahar, people are getting reservations to get to the Mukhia, Panchayat Mukhia position, and that is creating a kind of a churn that that there is a sense of a political empowerment in these several communities also. Now what this does is also, this also puts in not only a forward versus backward kind of a contestation, but this also puts in the intra hierarchical fights within the communities or within these clusters. Say the example of how this VIP and the Yadav or RJD fell out. Of course, there is the idea that Mukesh Sahni stormed out of the press conference room saying that Pete Pe Khanjar Bhauka and everything. But basically, we have to also understand that the position Nishads occupy in the social milieu is very similar to what Yadav occupy in the backward caste, in the sense that they are both aggressive caste. The number of police cases on Nishad community members and what used to be on Yadavs are also very similar. So, I mean, in Mukesh Sahni just released his manifesto today, and one of the key promises is that, and with several interviews that I have done with him, one of the main recurring themes is that we have to do police mein, beach bachao, police cases. So they have to do settlements for their own community people, because they are also very aggressive and they're prone to getting into conflicts and all. So when two backward castes or two caste communities which are contesting for power, there are bound to be these kind of frictions. And of course, with these kind of bottom-up empowerment or the policy effects of policy issues in this sense, we will see more such contestation happening. And whether that opens up for more parties, or that unifies and finds a common ground, like you said, or like Sanjay said about livelihood, or like about industries or education. So Upendra Kushwaha has been talking about education. Pappu Yadav to a certain extent has been talking about education. So whether education emerges as that one commonality or one tying, uniting thread, which will take into account and make this as a composite. But I think that we'll have to, even wait for that to see. It will be difficult to predict it. And the second question, I'm sorry, I forgot your second question. What was it?
Yeah, which is about the RJD, right? The new RJD, or if there is one.
Yes. So the RJD, again, yeah, thank you. Very interesting question. The main difference between Lalu Prasad Yadav's RJD and Tejaswi Yadav's RJD is one has delivered, and one we have seen, right? We have evidence for what that stands for. Whether it be Jungle Raj, whether it be empowerment, whether it be Lathi Tail Pilawan rally, or whatever. We have seen all of that, and we have seen all of that being performed, right, in the political landscape of Bihar. But the thing that Tejaswi still remains untested, in the sense that about 18 months in governance, he's not talking about 18 months in governance, right? And I see that happening with a lot of young leaders also, that Kanhaiya Kumar is not talking about what he did during the Corona period, right? So there are also leaders who are young leaders who are trying to get a political maturity through, in that sense of averting issues which are not entirely comfortable. We know that, right? Tejaswi was in Delhi during most of the lockdown period, right? And Nitish, of course, has been very pathetically unsympathetic to the people in the lockdown period, but so has been Tejaswi, or at least he woke up very late, right? So the point is that Tejaswi, definitely I have seen him address people. I've attended his rallies. I was doing study in the 2019 Lok Sabha election also, and he has matured as a speaker, as a public orator. From 2014, immediately, like you mentioned, the day after RJD won, and they were also not able to understand, right, the magnitude of the scale, because RJD has always had 18% or not votes, close to about 18% votes, right? Even when they got 22 MLAs in 2010, even then their vote share was still more or less solid. But then this time getting 80 MLAs, right? 81, and immediately after that there was a conference, or there was a meeting of all the MLAs at the RJD office, and I was there, and Tejaswi was basically propped up to address all these newly elected MLAs, and he was not able to make eye contact or make talk to them in one kind of a very coherent manner. And from that to this, that he is now, his rallies are being talked about, his rallies are getting so many people, and he is developing that kind of a charisma. I would not say it is still short of charisma, but I think there is a lot of promise what Tejaswi is showing in terms of political maturity. And I think that is something which is again very important. Much of the time what we see is also how these political actors, they perform in TV studio debates. But I think on the ground, if you witness a rally or two or three, then we understand that how are they getting to connect to the people. And I think Tejaswi is slowly picking up on that, and he's improving on that part. And in that sense, probably, we'll have to see, how much of a connect he has with the people. But again, how he will be in government, how he will handle the kind of infighting within the family, how he will handle Tej Pratap Yadav's demands, right? And how he will handle other parties' demands also, even Dipankar Bhattacharya's demands, if he wins, right? Because again, we have to understand that Yadavs and Male have been at very violent confrontations in much of the Bhojpur belt, right? And they have also been in alliance. So CPI alliance, Lalu Prasad had CPI alliance in 1990, I think 1995 onwards. I think Sanjay sir can explain better. But I think there has been an alliance, but there has also been very violent confrontations. So how that is now accommodated, and how in government that is, a party in Prachar is different, but a party in government is different. So, Nitish Kumar can be the worst campaigner because he is I really don't find him to be an inspiring political speaker, orator. But he is an excellent administrator. At least he used to be an excellent administrator. So there is a difference. And we have to see that, if Tejaswi, the campaigner, can match up to Tejaswi, the administrator, if and when he gets a chance. I think it's still yet to be proven.
Yes. Thank you, Sarthak. Archis, a question is probably our last question for the day. this is from Pallavi, coming from Pallavi, and I'll add something to this. I'm gonna probably add a slight fear of mine that I've been holding for a while. Is this so she's asking if BJP realizes that it cannot be a dominant political party at states levels after Maharashtra, after Bihar. And I'd add that Tamil Nadu is coming up, right? And Tamil Nadu is something they've been having this long project in Tamil Nadu, where you've had a stalwart of federalism pass away, and you've been doing this long project, and they hope that this will be some sort of laboratory for them into the south and the rest of the country also. So for me, the question is, how does the BJP view federalism? Do they think it's some sort of integral part of India, that or part of how we function as a country, or to them it's indispensable? So how different is probably, to ask a slightly, I don't know, larger question, how is it different from the Congress's view on federalism? From the BJP or Modi? I don't know what the difference is anymore, but yes, if you can, Archis, thank you.
Very controversial. I see BJP as two parties. One party when it lacks majority or it's in the opposition, and another party, totally a different party, when it has good majority, even brute majority. So when it's in the opposition or lacks majority, I think BJP is a party that believes in regional party. It's a party which is even willing to play second fiddle. But then there's this expansionist streak, and then BJP either tries to capture that space that this regional party mostly, or the smaller party occupies, and tries to make it bipolar. When it comes to politics, it's tried everywhere, and it's partially succeeded in a lot of places. The places it hasn't succeeded are well known. Orissa, but it hopes to succeed eventually. Naveen Babu is aging. It's trying in Bengal, and this was its movement in Bihar. That's politically. Again, Maharashtra, it's tried. Haryana, it's kind of been successful, at least in the last few years. Similarly, I think on policy level, BJP has believed in federalism somewhat, at least paid lip service to, as long as it was a party that needed coalition partners. The moment it's found a majority, it's been a different beast. And we've seen so many examples of this. Last 1 year, you see so many examples of this. And this started right from the time it introduced the land bill. Now the land is state subject, and it tried to encroach upon the rights of the states. It was primarily because of electoral defeats that it had to backtrack on that. And it's support for the GST. Even amendments in UA, the role that the governors have played of late, at least for the last 2-3 years. He has two different parties. One which is in minority, it behaves differently, and another when it's in majority.
Archis, you're not very audible. Can you switch off the video so that I think the connection will be better? If you switch off the video and put the audio on. Yeah, can you? I think we lost you for the last few seconds.
Oh, no, I just said that BJP is, I was only summing it up, that BJP is two different parties, one when it's in a coalition partner, or it's in minority, and another party when it has substantial, significant majority.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry, because I think the connection was a little iffy towards the end. I'm sorry. Yes, so I think we'll wind up. I think we'll give 30 seconds to 1 minute for all the speakers to give us a wrap of their thoughts. And to Sanjay sir, there is a last question. So if you can include that in your final comments. There is a question from AV about what you think about the likes of Pushpam Priya Chaudhary, and their political strategies, especially in times we need when we feel states like Bihar must have women youth representatives. So Sanjay sir, if you can go include this in your closing remarks, if you can. So you're on mute, Sanjay sir.
Yeah. So the question is related to Pushpam Priya Chaudhary and the leaders of that kind. I think this is the last election, and these are my concluding comments related to Pushpam Priya Chaudhary and other young leaders. I think this would be the last election when we would see a seasoned politician like Nitish Kumar being contesting elections in a full-fledged manner. 20 the next election in Bihar would be in 2025. And I think that's the election which is going to be the election of the youth in Bihar, youth leaders in Bihar. Tejasvi, uh, Chirag, Pushpam Priya Chaudhary, Kanhaiya Kumar, and who knows, couple of others might pop up by that time. And by the time, since we have already mentioned the age of Nitish Kumar, who is now 69, by the time he would be 74. I'm not saying that, I'm not suggesting that there should be a retirement age for politician. This is BJP's plank, not my plank. But going by all means, he had a long inning in politics. If he manages to be the chief minister for next 5 years, he would be the longest serving chief minister of any Hindi heartland state. I think this is going to be the last election where Nitish Kumar is going to be. Nitish Kumar is already playing an active role, more active than any other election, because he is at the center of this election. So 2025 election is for Pushpam Priya Chaudhary, but at the moment it's too early to make a comment, because I don't know whether she would really she's interested in taking the party forward. She's interested in working hard to set up this party, or sometimes people actually set up these proxy parties for a lateral entry into a mainstream established political party. Let's see what happens. But I think 2025 election is going to be the election of the young leaders in Bihar, and I'm looking forward to that election when we will see lots of young leaders battling against each other.
Yes, thank you, sir. Archis, if you can.
I see it in terms of this increasing narrative about bipolar politics, essentially between BJP and Congress. There are few outlier states, Bihar being one of them, where neither of these two parties are principally the bigger parties. The BJP admittedly got the highest number of vote share in 2015 and as well as in 2019, but it still needs another party, the regional party, to be a. So I see it as the future, whether these smaller regional parties, especially these parties of the social justice movement, continue to survive, how they reinvent themselves, how the space, whether the space can be appropriated by the two national parties, or whether it remains relevant in the years to come, and how these youngsters, the younger leaders, they are legatees of the Mandal politics, but they are post-Mandal. Tejasvi Yadav was born nearly in the chief minister's bungalow. I mean, or an MP's bungalow, 89. Lalu Prasad Yadav became the chief minister a few months later. So how do people like Chirag Paswan, Tejasvi Yadav, and others who are generally born with a silver spoon in a sense and probably not been party to the struggles of the social justice movement, how they take this forward?
Thank you, Archis. Sarthak,
right. So I think, I think both of them have really pointed out of hit the nail that it's about the youth also, because you also see that Bihar is one of the youngest states in India, right, in terms of demography. And also the thing that I think continue also from your question about Lalu and Tejasvi, I think that's also the difference will also emerge more clearly in the next next 5 years or 10 years, that the shift from the idea of social justice to what Tejasvi Yadav recently called in an interview about economic justice. It's also time to talk about economic justice. And I think there was this slogan in the 90s in Lalu's period that Vikas nahi samman chahiye, right? And I think the age before, like from the time ahead, will also be about a politics of Samman, but also Samman ke saath Saman. And by Saman, I mean not in terms of bribes, in terms of free COVID vaccines or anything else, but Saman in the sense of a material growth, or in the sense of economic or prosperity or economic justice or employment and education and other things. A lot of it has already been achieved through Nitish Kumar's redistributive schemes of cycles, uniform pension, etc. But I think the aspiration is actually for getting more from in terms of the state, and I think that is something that the next phase of social justice will harp more on the economic justice part. And I think that is where probably future of Bihar politics will probably be navigating towards or drifting towards.
Thanks a lot, Sarthak. I think we can conclude now. This was quite informative for everybody, and thank you for answering all our questions too. It's like we keep saying that we can only talk about what we see, and this is something that's changing daily on the ground. I mean, yesterday Nitish Kumar comes and praises Modi all of a sudden, and everybody's trying to understand what's going on, right? And so I think this is, I mean, what is election if it's not fun and confusing and chaotic for everybody? But thank you for participating. Thank you for joining all the people who were there watching us. This was very nice. Thank you for joining with us. I'll leave to Pallavi for some closing comments.
And I would also like to thank all the organizers and the co-panelists also. Thank you. It's been a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Sarthak. Thank you, Deepu. Thank you, Sanjay sir and Archis for joining us today. I think it gives one of the aims of Asian Pathfinders is to have these constructive dialogues and have these constructive discussions where when you watch it on television, right, it's just entertainment. I've stopped watching TV debates because of this. So I think this was a really great way of understanding Bihar politics and actually how this kind of politics also shapes our current Indian political narrative. So thank you to the panelists and to the participants also for joining us. And like I said at the start, keep an eye out on our social media pages for our upcoming dialogues as well as our fireside chats. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.